Taking control of photos with Jason Snell. This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by Notion AI, the one tool that does it all. Try Notion AI for free at notion.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's time to talk to another Take Control author, this time about something that has seen an Apple program that has seen some significant updates and changes. And that's why we need to come right to the source and find out what those are and what they mean for us. I'm happy to welcome back after way too long an old friend, Jason Snell, who is the author of Take Control of Photos, 4th edition. Jason, it's great to see you. Why haven't we done this sooner? This is crazy.
I guess I just haven't been doing anything. I don't know. I don't know. That's not true.
No,
it's great to be back, though, talking to you about photos, which is like a little ritual that we've got. That I feel like I do the photo book and then we talk about it, which is very nice. And this was a big update. You know, it's that thing where I sit at WWDC and I'm literally on the Apple campus, and I see them roll out their changes to photos. And this time, literally everybody around me looked at me like, "Oh, well, there's your summer." I was like, "Yeah, but I guess it's I got back to Joe Kissel, and I said, "Well, it's a new edition for sure, not a question," because they made some huge changes, especially on the iPhone and iPad side.
Isn't it fun when somebody else puts something on your agenda that you had no idea was coming?
That's my relationship with Apple in a nutshell. Is I am at the whims of whatever Apple decides to introduce. So yes, so it was a busy summer and now a busy fall, right? Because they do their usual OS and iPhones and probably more stuff coming, and so it's a very busy time. But yeah, my summer, I knew immediately, well, this is going to be a big one, and so yes, that's why it's the 4th edition of Take Control of Photos this time.
Somewhere deep inside the spaceship is a Jason Snell committee that says, okay, this is what we're going to assign him this year. So,
I mean, sometimes it feels like that. I know it's not that, but I do sometimes feel like they're like, how can we make his life the most complex possible?
Well, they're doing a good job, and we appreciate you rising to the occasion. So, I mean, where do we even start? I'm going to let you tell us what we need to know about the new photos and what you've done with the book. Because, yeah, you're right. There seem to be a lot of changes.
Well, first off, and I think we talked about this the last time I was on talking about the book, is when I started this book, it was about Photos for Mac, right, which was the successor to iPhoto. And the Photos app on the iPhone and iPad was very simple. And over the years, it has gotten more and more complex to the point where a few years ago, it really was clear that they were the same app now. That Apple really did expect that, with a few exceptions of stuff that they just didn't want to implement, I guess, on iOS, that they were going to bring a bunch of the same stuff to iPhone and iPad, that they know that they've got a lot of users who want to manage their photos and they want to do it on their phone or they want to do it on their iPad. And they started doing iCloud, shared library sync and iCloud photo sync and all these things. So it's really evolved over time to be like last year. I really felt like we had finally gotten the structure last year and the year before, where my book transformed from being a book about photos on the Mac with some sidebars about like, here's what happens on the iPhone, to being a book about photos on the Mac or the iPad and the iPhone, like, whatever, they're all pretty much the same. And structurally, from a writing standpoint, that means that instead of writing chapters about here's how you do X with a little sidebar that says on the iPhone, try this, it became here's how you do X, period. And it was like each paragraph is sort of like you do this on the Mac or do this on the iPhone, but basically you could do all the same thing. So I rolled it all together, and that's been the last couple of years of the book, is really making it like Photos is just an app now on Apple's platforms, and there are slight behavioral differences, but they're very similar. And then this year, they blew it all up and introduced radically different user interface on the iPad and iPhone while not really changing the Mac at all, which meant, for me, a lot of deconstruction. I didn't want to turn the book back into sort of like two separate things, but it did introduce a lot of structural issues, including, I basically rewrote the first few chapters of the book and moved a bunch of stuff around because the way that Apple approached photos, which kind of stem from the Mac, is not the way they approach it now, and so I needed to kind of revisit it. And the good thing when I started to dig in is that one of the big changes that they made is kind of, and it's controversial, and we can talk about that, but like it's actually, they're kind of splitting the difference. And what they're really doing is sort of showing you two things at once when you launch the app on the iPhone or iPad. But the things that they're showing you are still things that they had before to a certain extent and that also exist on the Mac. And that meant that structurally, I found a way through to sort of like explain this, because I do think that a lot of people are using this app on their phone and their iPad, and I want the book to be useful to them. I don't want it to just be a book for Mac users, because even though I suspect a lot of my readers for the book are using the Mac, they're almost certainly spending time with these apps on their phones and maybe their iPads. So it was a huge structural change because of a conception shift on Apple's part. And it's a shift that I understand and I think I endorse, but it did lead to a lot of rethinking. I had to rethink what I thought the app was because they rethought what the app was.
So before we get into specifics, let me ask you, what at this time, because it could change tomorrow, we know how that goes, which is the best platform to manage your photos on? Is there a best, or is it just different?
I don't think there's a best. I don't think there's been a best for a little while now. I really think it's whatever you want. There are a few things you can still do on the Mac that you can't do on the iPhone or the iPad, but and I think for Mac users it's going to be, if you're building like albums and things, the Mac is more efficient. And if you're trying to build a calendar or something, you can actually do that on an iPad or even an iPhone. But on the Mac, it might be the most efficient, and that's where I do it. What I do on my phone or my iPad is different than what I do on my Mac. But the fact is, if you didn't have a Mac and you just had an iPad and an iPhone, you could do a pretty great job of managing a large photo library without any trouble. You know, like I said, they are mostly at parity now and have been for a couple of years. There are a few places here and there, unless, I mean, all the usual caveats apply. If you're really thinking old school and you're like, I don't want iCloud syncing and I just want to import photos and leave them on my Mac on a hard drive and all of that, and not use any of these things that are sort of how Apple wants you to do it, then using an iPad or an iPhone kind of doesn't make sense. But if you embrace the way Apple wants you to think about your photo library, then it doesn't matter.
Interesting. Okay. So, I mean, what do we need to know? And it sounds like we're probably going to talk primarily about iOS and iPadOS.
Yeah.
What do we need to know about the changes?
I mean, the changes ripple to the Mac in a kind of weird way, but they're pretty minimal because Apple has decided that on the Mac, you know, you've got a big window with a sidebar, and that it makes sense that way. There's actually still a sidebar on the iPad, even though it's hidden by default. You can show it, and it's still useful. It's an interesting hybrid approach where it's sort of made all the changes that the iPhone did, but you can still get to the sidebar. Um, but the big change, and you know, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about this or they've noticed it if they've updated to iOS 18, is Apple has two. I'm going to back up and talk about Apple's philosophy here for a second, because the thing is, what is the Photos app supposed to be? And on an iPhone, especially, I think more than any other device, it one of its purposes is an extremely utilitarian purpose, and I think that it's been that way for ages. It dates back to the era where we didn't really even think about a photo library on our iPhone. We thought about a camera roll, which was a concept that they had for a while. And I think part of what Photos has evolved from is this idea that it is a utilitarian way to access the images that you captured that are on your iPhone. And so when you think of, I'm going to go look at a grid, you know, squares of images that are things I've taken in a chronological order from the most recent at the bottom, which is what I see, and then I can scroll back through history, or at the top, depending, but whatever. And it's all pure chronological, one by one, and that's what it is. Like, that is where it came from, and that still is useful. And I hear from people, I think that our more tech focused people who listen to podcasts like this and read my stuff on Six Colors and all of that, like I think that they're more inclined to view that as a key part of what Photos is a utilitarian photo management would be another way to put it, since you mentioned that. The idea that I'm managing a library, when I'm on my phone, I just want to get to that thing that I took recently and do something with it, whatever it is, edit it, share it, whatever. I just want access to it. It's a quick access for basically for recent images. The problem with that, I mean, that's fine. That is absolutely one of the purposes of it. And I think what Apple struggled with is it's not the only purpose. And the problem is Apple has invested a decade at least. We all are talking about Apple intelligence now and machine learning and stuff. Apple has been using machine learning algorithms to analyze photos in your photo library for like at least a decade. And it started out small, but like they introduced the ability to do the things that I think they called categories back in the day. And the idea there is like if you've got a picture of a dog and you search for dog, it shows you the picture of the dog. It also shows you a picture of a cow and a cat. And, it wasn't perfect, but I used to use iView as my media library. And then I sort of did this when I moved to Photos, but I kind of gave it up. But I used to go through photo by photo and tag like who was in every picture. My wife's in this one, my wife and daughter are in this one. And like, I don't do that anymore because Apple has machine learning based software that will say, your wife is in this picture, your kid, your daughter is in this picture, your wife and daughter are in this picture, your son is in this picture, your cat is in this picture, or a cat. Starting last year, it was this cat, this dog. And so they've invested a decade and so much code and so many AI, basically, we would say algorithms on image detection and understanding in Photos. The whole point of that was that you don't have to tag your library and you can find things that you want, especially if you're taking pictures with an iPhone, right? You've got location as well. So you can literally search for your wife and daughter in Hawaii. And this is one of the examples I use in the book. And without any work on your part, other than taking the pictures, it will show you all the pictures of your wife and daughter in Hawaii. Now, they've gotten better with that stuff over time. The truth is, every time you take a picture, not only is Apple doing all the stuff with its image pipeline, where it's taking a bunch of pictures and merging them together and doing all this wild computational photography stuff that they talk about a lot. The next thing that happens is that the contents of that image are analyzed millions of times by various ML algorithms and cataloged, and it places in the photo library the contents of that photo. It's a beach. It's got a frisbee. It's got a dog. It's got this person. It's got this person. It does all of that analysis. Why does it do all of this? Well, it does it, like I said, so you can find your photos later. And this is the other thing about the Photos app that Apple knows is an important part of it, which is, why do we take pictures? If all I ever access is the 100 most recent pictures I've taken on my phone, then sure, Photos as a grid that is just purely utilitarian makes sense. But that's not it. We take pictures so that we can look at them later. And I think the challenge was that Apple, and they know, right? They know things that we don't, we can guess, but they know for certain. I think Apple felt like all of that work was mostly ignored by the users, in part because it was hidden. You could get to it through search, and you could get to it by going like on the iPhone to a different tab. And I think this really frustrated Apple. They are like, if people knew this stuff existed, they would use it. And it's not just being able to search for something, but it's Apple being able to use its algorithms to identify things you might want to see from your past, from your 10, 20 years, hundreds of thousands of photos in my case, over 20 years, 25 years almost at this point, of digital photos in my iCloud photo library. So Apple did something weird and remarkable, which is they broke their own interface guidelines. They got rid of the tab interface on the iPhone. And when you open Photos now, it's sort of two things in one. The top 2/3 is the utilitarian grid. And if you swipe down to enter that, you enter a mode that is very much like the old default mode where you're just scrolling back through time. But the bottom third ish is this thing called collections. And they're organizing your photos in ways that are more intelligent than one photo per square backward through time. And the beauty of it is it's customizable. So one of the things you can do if you because one of the arguments I hear is like, oh, Apple's just finding old photos and showing them to me, and I don't want to see them. And what are they doing? And they're getting in my way. Well, the beauty about collections is that collections can be utilitarian. One of the best collections, and it's the top one by default, is called Recent Days. And all it does is show you the last few days that you've taken photos in groups with a highlighted photo. Which, let me tell you, if you want to be purely utilitarian and you want to go back 8 days to when you took that photo, it's actually a lot easier to scroll back in the Recent Days collection to that day and tap on it and see all the photos you took that day than it is to swipe back through that grid and be like, when was that? Is that it? When was that? I don't know. Like, it's actually pretty good to be utilitarian. But also, what's down there is there's a thing called trips where it's using your geodata and time and figuring out when you've taken trips, not just like as you go, but historically. And they're all there, and you can swipe through all the trips you've taken based on your photo library. It's got people and pets, which now there's a new feature this year, which is groups. So it used to be you had to go to the Mac because they didn't have smart albums on iPad or iPhone, and you make a smart album. And this is what I would do for my family, my core 4 members of my family. And I would say photo must contain all of. Photo has Jason, photo has Lauren, photo has Jamie, photo has Julian. And then I would discover, wow, we only took 4 photos together all year, right? Like, it's like, oh, we need to do a better job of taking selfies when we're all together or asking passersby to take pictures of us. Well, you don't have to do any of that anymore because on your iPad or your iPhone, you can make a person group and choose those 4 people, and then it just now you also have that, and it's one tap to see all your photos of any particular person or pet or any group that you set up. And then there are more. There's featured photos and there's other kind of collections that Apple has thrown in there. But like what Apple's trying to do is say scrolling through a grid is utilitarian, but it's so limited. And there are better ways to organize this information. And we've applied huge amounts of technological resources to get your information in a better place. So we're going to show it to you on launch. We're going to show you that stuff because there's more to life than scrolling through that grid. And I understand if you're very utilitarian focused, you're like, why are you getting in my face with this stuff? But I would argue that once you get used to it, even from a purely utilitarian viewpoint, it's better because the recent days and trips and faces being right there will probably help you find what you want to find faster. But also, since it's entirely customizable, you can put anything in that collections area up at the top that you want, that you find valuable, and you can pin stuff up there. Anyway, it's a big change because you launch. It really is. I mean, Chuck, you know this. A lot of computer interface stuff is you launch something and it's unfamiliar, and you go, "What the heck is this thing? It's different. It's changed. I don't like it." And I get that, but like I think Apple is made a lot of effort and broke a lot of conventions because they felt like people were missing out on all these other ways of finding the photos that they want to see or discovering photos that they took that they've forgotten about that are great. And so they split the difference. So that's the huge change because there's no longer like you open photos and go to the library. Instead, it's you open photos and the library is kind of up there and collections are down there. And where would you like to go now? And when you swipe into collections, you're in collections mode. And when you swipe into the library, you're in library mode. And that was a challenge to describe. But once I figured it out, and the collections are all the rule, like what a collection is, they all behave basically the same way. I was like, oh, I see. They've unified this. Like it used to be like there were memories and favorites, and albums, and they were all kind of different, and now they're all pretty much the same in how they work, and that's really useful too. So I think they did a good job. I understand that it's going to be really jarring for a lot of people, but in the end, having written about this for a decade, I can tell you it's um, Apple has done some very good work. And what's the point of having this huge photo library if we don't have um, essentially a high tech assistant to help us find photos that we took 10 years ago that we love? We need to be able to do that, and that's what that collections view is all about.
Today's edition of Mac Voices is supported by Notion. Try Notion for free at notion.com/macvoices. The new Notion AI is a single AI tool that does it all. Search across Notion and other apps, generate docs in your own style, analyze PDFs and images, and chat with you about anything. How would you like a tool that combines your notes, docs, and projects into one space? That space is simple, beautifully designed, and easy to work with. That's not too much to ask, and Notion delivers. But Notion goes beyond that, with the capabilities of multiple AI tools like ChatGPT-4 and Claude built in, so that you can search, generate, analyze, and chat all inside Notion. The more you use Notion, the more it can personalize its responses just for you. Generic chatbots sound like generic chatbots, and it's getting easier to spot them the more we all use AI. None of that with Notion AI, since it has the context of your work to draw and learn from. In use by over half of Fortune 500 companies, Notion is helping teams cancel unnecessary meetings, send less emails, always a good thing, and get more done while keeping everyone on the same page. The time has come for you to get into the game. Try Notion for free when you go to notion.com/macvoices. That's all lowercase, notion.com/macvoices, to try the powerful, easy-to-use Notion AI today. And when you use my link, you're supporting Mac Voices. Notion.com/macvoices. Give it a try. Thanks to Notion for supporting Mac Voices. Jason, I wish we could take this part of the conversation and play it for every iOS 18 and iPadOS user out there, because I'm once again frustrated by the fact that Apple doesn't communicate this stuff the way it should. Everything you just said makes perfect sense. Makes me look at my phone and go, didn't think about it that way. And you also said, that it took you some time to figure it out. And that's that's too bad that anyone has to figure it out, that it's not communicated so glaringly obviously, because now all of a sudden I want to go back and start looking at collections and figuring out ways to make more use of my photos instead of doing just what I just watched somebody else do it last week, where there was something that happened a year and a half ago, and so they're scrolling through their phone trying to find the right date,
right?
Because for some strange reason they actually remembered what month and year it was in. But why?
Let me stop you there. I mean, you're absolutely right. I wrote a piece. So I did write a piece on 6colors about the new version of Photos a couple weeks ago, where I made the case that I sort of made to you just now. I also wrote a piece a year ago about watching how my wife used Photos and used the iPhone, and it was just a real moment of realization that she would learn how to do something and then she's never going to learn a new way of doing it. That's just, I think, how a lot of people are. So like I told her, oh, you can remove apps from your home screen and they're still on your phone and you can search for them, but they're not on your home screen anymore. She still had pages and pages and pages of apps in folders. I said, you don't need to do that anymore. And she just, that iOS update came and she just ignored it because she's like, I already know how to do apps. And same with Photos. It's like, I just know how to do Photos. And you get in this trap. And this is more big philosophical question, but it is like, if you're Apple, how do you show people new features on their devices? How do you do that? And the problem is, if I'm just trying to get a photo right now in the instant, if Apple pops up the thing and says, hey, welcome to the new version of Photos, let me show you around. You're like, no, go away. I need to find this photo and send it to somebody. And now you've lost the one time. So I think Apple has built some new technology into iOS 17 and 18 that expands the tip kit, basically, which is like how to give tips and tricks so that you have the ability to sort of like catch somebody later, not right at first glance, and offer tips about how to use an app at various points. I think that everybody needs to do more, and Apple needs to make more effort in doing that. I also wonder if what Apple's experimenting with Apple Intelligence, which is the idea that uh, all of the help information in the system is now going to be indexed by Apple Intelligence, so you can ask Siri, um, "How do I do this?" and it should actually tell you. I wonder if that's a pathway to doing some of that, is like basically letting the assistant say, "I will teach you how to use anything if you want." And if there might be a way through there, but it's very hard because we all get set in our ways, and that's, if people are paying attention, that's why I do my thing where I'm trying to wave my hands and tell people to tell their friends and loved ones who are doing this. You mentioned looking; they knew when the photo was taken. I mean, so this has been true for a while, but it's actually way more upgraded in iOS 18, which is Apple's search feature inside Photos. Um, it's it's way better now. Like it's essentially like a Google search where you can just type stuff and it knows what you're doing. So if I gave you that example before. It used to be that it was like I typed Lauren and then selected and that was a keyword, and then Jamie and selected and that was a keyword, and then beach and I'd select that, or Hawaii and select that as a keyword, and it would give me a search of that. Now you can just type pictures of Lauren and Jamie on a beach in Hawaii into the search box just as text, and it finds them, and it's very good at it. And that goes for dates too. I guess that's what I'm saying is, if your friend knew the date, they could literally just search for the date and it would show all the photos from that date. That's all you have to do, because that Photos app has a database. It knows every single photo you've taken that it's got in its database, when, where, assuming it was taken by basically an Apple device that has geolocation tagged to it, or you've tagged it that way. It's analyzed all the faces. It's analyzed all the content. So if you say, picture of Julian with a goat, because we took him to Train Town in Sonoma and they have a goat feeding thing. If I search for Julian with a goat, it will find the 4 photos from 15 years ago of my son with a goat at a petting zoo, right? Like that, it will find them. So some of it is just, maybe you should just search. And it's tied into Spotlight too. So if you search out in the home screen, it will actually perform those photo searches too and offer those as results. So there's a lot of different ways to get to this stuff. But I think like I said, recent days is very utilitarian, but it's also really great. It's like, oh yeah, instead of scrolling through every photo I've taken for the last 8 days to get back to 8 days ago, I can just go back 8 days and go, yeah, that was when I was at that football game, and tap on it, and I get those photos. And likewise, people and pets, especially with the group functionality, like a lot of times that's what you want is, I just want to look at all the pictures that we took of my mom, and you tap once and you're there, and it's really powerful. Um, Especially if you start getting large libraries where there's no way you're tagging it yourself, and those photos are all there, but do you ever go back and see them? And that's where the system processing that stuff and knowing where it is and then showing it to you could be incredibly powerful. Because again, I mean, my thesis about all of this is, why do you have thousands of photos if not to look at them later? And if they just scroll off into the infinite grid of your photos library, you're not taking advantage of the fact that you have all those photos. You're not finding them. So, and I know a lot of people are like, well, I make albums for things. It's like, I make albums too, but it's a lot of work. And sometimes I don't get around to making an album for that trip. And the fact is, photos, the way these collections work is that they also do some curation. They kind of drop out by default. They drop out a bunch of duplicates. So you tap on that trip and it's, you took 8 photos of the same thing and maybe only shows you one. You can set it to show them all, but by default, it's curated them. It's made a little movie based on all the stuff you shot for that trip, and you can just play that movie and share that with somebody. Like, it's done it for you. And if you want to take control and uh, build your own photo album for a trip, you can, but the point is you don't have to. And that's, I think, pretty great.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.